Yo, what's up? We are now sitting in a Maxus e-Niro 9. I'm actually doing a 1,000 kilometer challenge. It's 7:28 in the morning now, Sunday morning, and we are heading north now towards, we just passed Hogstorp, getting close to Tallinn. But okay, whatever, just to give you guys an idea where the heck we are and what car we are in. So, you know, Maxus, that's a Chinese car, it's on the SAIC. And a couple of days ago when I did a charging test, well, first a range test and then charging test, I had some serious problems getting the car to handshake on Ioniq. It uses the old tritium chargers, but you guys know Ioniq, they use fat 800 volt cables with the liquid cooling in it, so it kept failing handshake even when I held the plug against the car. But eventually it worked, but it was quite low chance to maybe when I usually when I hold the plug against the car, then it becomes 100% chance to work. But even with this car, it's like 60-70% chance to work. It might still fail. But you know, this got me thinking, why is it that so many Chinese cars, they bug on handshake, or they have problems handshaking? I mean, it's not the Chinese cars only. Also, some Western cars. Well, actually, when I think about this, Polestar 2 had some problems. Also, Fat e-tron. Polestar 2 was manufactured in China. But okay, whatever. But yeah, actually, some of the Stellantis cars also. Yeah. But okay. But at least the Chinese cars. Many Chinese cars, they will fail on handshake. Okay, I need to explain here. When you hold the plug, why does it suddenly work? Because the upper part of the Type 2, or I mean the CCS plug, is the Type 2 part. The lower, the two big round circles, that's the like the DC part, the direct current, whereas the top is also for the AC. But the communication also on the top pins. So when you don't have perfect connection, especially a heavy cable like the Ioniq cable I mentioned earlier, it tends to sag a little bit, and then you might not get perfect connection on the top, and then communication fails. But it depends. You can actually supposedly tune this even with software to maybe change the parameters a bit and change the how much slack you allow in the signal or losses, or I don't know, packet loss, whatever, I'm not sure. But some cars will never handshake. I mean, I've never had problem handshaking. You just plug it in, like many of the, like pretty much all the ABRP cars. You plug it in, it handshakes, no problem. But then by holding the plug, you make sure that the communication handshake. Yeah, handshake is that initial back and forth communication where the car and the charger negotiate things, and then it starts charging, right? And once it starts charging, you can let go, and then it will, at least for most cars, work fine. It will keep charging. But there's actually some cars, like the Stellantis cars, I don't remember, I think it was the Peugeot E 3008, I don't remember, one of the Peugeots. Actually, many of the Stellantis cars, I needed to use the trash bin to keep the plug kind of tight against the car. Otherwise, it will stop charging. And I think this also happened to some of the Chinese cars. But okay, a little bit explanation of what is going on. But at least once it starts handshake and it works, then it works, right? But with this car, it had problems with handshake, this Maxus e-Niro 9. But also many Chinese cars, they just simply doesn't, I mean, not many, but some, right? They just don't work on certain chargers. And this is not something I just make up. For example, the Xlantics ET and ES I was supposed to borrow earlier, actually I think it was in September, suddenly they pull out, they backed out, and they said that, okay, we are not ready yet. I was like, huh, okay. And I heard rumors that they had problems handshaking or even working on certain chargers. Maybe it was Alpitronic or something, right? So how can it be that they just can't figure this out? And I think it has something to do with that in China they use GBT plug. They don't use CCS like we use in Europe. So like the cars have been developed, designed for the native GBT plug. And I also heard the GBT, well, the GBT is similar to the CHAdeMO plug. It's supposed to use the same signals. I think you guys need to correct me. I think they use as CAN bus signals, the GBT and CHAdeMO, whereas and supposedly that's superior, but the CCS uses a less elegant way, but it still works, of course, with some other signals. And also the CHAdeMO actually locks the. I think it's a station that locks the plug, whereas in the CCS, it's the car that locks the plug. It has a pin that locks the Type 2 sign, right? Well, okay. So I'm guessing it's because the Chinese car manufacturers, they just designed the cars originally for GBT. You guys remember Xpeng G3 came out many years ago. When it came to Europe, they went for CHAdeMO plug, which is a bit surprising because back then that was one, it was around 2021 or something. CCS has been existing for a long time in Europe, and it was a bit surprising that they went for CHAdeMO. And the reasoning behind it supposedly was that CHAdeMO is similar to GBT, so it was easier for Xpeng to port it from GBT to CHAdeMO. And the form factor or the shape is also quite similar, but they went for 50 kilowatt only. This was around 66 kilowatt hour battery on the G3, and it charges at only around 48 kilowatt, which was almost like a disaster back then. Other cars would charge maybe at least 75 to 100 kilowatt, right, with those battery sizes. But yeah, at least it didn't fail on Handshake, because at least the the CHAdeMO with Leaf and stuff and Soul, it almost never fails on Handshake. Maybe because when you plug it in, you lock it. It locks. It has a locking mechanism, and then it just does the Handshake flawlessly. But yeah, so that's probably why the Chinese cars they fail on Handshake, and because they because it's not their home turf. But I think there's another reason for their Handshake fail. In China, they don't use the chargers we use in Europe. You know, they don't use Kempower and Alpitronics or ABB. They use their own hardware over there. Like I've seen in Thailand, there's Charge Core or some stuff or whatever they use there. It would be too expensive for them probably to import from the Western world or Europe. And it's way cheaper for them to use their own charging hardware. So it means that the cars that they develop, like many cars actually, for example, again, prime example, Nio ES8, it was existing in China for a long time before they ported it over to Europe. And they probably designed it for Chinese hardware, and they never tried it against European chargers, but eventually they did, right? That's one of the ways for them to port over. But I suspect that they haven't covered all the corner cases, all the different whatever scenarios, and that's why we keep seeing these Chinese cars, they fail on Handshake, or it just simply doesn't work at all on certain chargers like Kempower or Tesla. Also, I've seen it. Don't remember, was it MG? Some people say that even some of the MGs, they still don't work on Tesla supercharger. So, and this is actually not a unique case with the Chinese. It seems like it is a bit complicated, the whole the whole handshake or the whole ISO standard, because the cars, they might not always follow the ISO standard, and even the charger might not follow it. So it depends. I remember I talked about this with Kempower, and they said that, well, many cars, they don't follow the standard. So, but Kempower strictly follows the standard. So when the car does the handshake, it communicates with the charger, and it's like, you know, like prime example, like a practical example. When people say this car has a 102 kilowatt battery, I'm like, no, it's 102 kilowatt hour. Don't mix kilowatt and kilowatt hour. But I do the correction, even if you have errors in your language or grammar or unit, I correct it for you and I understand you. So in a way, it's like Kempower. Do they then correct the cars, or, you know, or do they just deny it and say, it's incorrect format, handshake fails? So what I heard from Kempower is that they apply, sorry, I've been live streaming a lot, I've been talking a lot, but they apply exceptions and they detect what kind of car it is or something like that, and they then apply corrections so that handshake will work. So they actually have to add extra rules so that certain cars will not fail. But ideally, if people just follow the HTML standard, right, like Internet Explorer does, then all the web pages should display correctly. But that's not the case with different browsers, and that's not the case with some certain cars versus chargers. But if you guys remember in 2019 when Tesla Model 3 came to Europe, even the Model 3 with CCS plug had problems handshaking against some chargers. I remember it. I was struggling big time to get it to handshake against the Elbilmek. And I think later also Kempower, yeah, I think it was like that. And to the point where I just gave up using Kempower with my Model 3 with MC Hammer. And then eventually Kempower, just like they had to reach out to Tesla and they talk to each other and they figure out how to fix the handshake problem. so yeah, it's probably not easy. You can say it's easier said than done, but even for browsers, right? Web browsers, even they cannot get it right with the whole standard. But I think it's better now. I feel like 10 years ago it was freaking chaos, man. Web developers, they had to make extra code so that it would work on Internet Explorer. But then Opera would work fine. Of course, no problem. Opera kicks ass for the Lord. It's a Norwegian product. But also interesting that when we talk about the CCS and Chadamo, I also wonder why China is using GPT. While I was about to say the rest of the world uses CCS, but that's actually not even the case. But fortunately, okay, Europe uses CCS and Type 2, and then I guess majority of Asia uses CCS and Type 2. Thailand uses CCS just like in Europe. That's why you can actually export a UK Tesla over to Thailand and it can work just fine. Just need to do some minor changes. Actually, I don't think you need to do anything. They even have, they also drive on the wrong side of the road, you know. But China is weird. They use Type 2, but they use GPT. I don't know if they actually have CCS2 over there. We're gonna find out eventually when they go there. But then US, for some reason, they're stuck with Type 1. And then some guy in the live stream said that, but because in US they don't have 3-phase. What the heck, man? Even in 2025 they don't use 3-phase. Are they still on 110 volt? That is so inefficient. Because for them, if you don't need 3-phase support, then you don't really have that great benefit of Type 2. they can just stay with the Type 1. But Type 1 is clumsy. You cannot lock the plug, unlike Type 2. And it doesn't support 3-phase. So they have... Okay, I need to explain more. They have... they use Type 1. I don't know, it has a different name for it, but yeah. J something, I don't remember. J66176 something. But they have Type 1 and then the CCS under it, right? So it becomes like CCS. So they actually have CCS Type 1 in the US, but then in Europe and Asia we use Type 2 and CCS 2. But if you guys know from the history, in the early days we had the CCS version 1 that supports up to 200 amp. So for example, Kona and e-Niro, or Niro EV that was called in Korea in the old days, and also classic Ioniq, they only go up to 200 amp. Well, actually classic Ioniq doesn't go that high, but for example Kona, prime example, it's kind of sneaky. Hyundai, they claim that it supports 100 kilowatt chargers, but it doesn't go to 100 kilowatt. For the longest time I thought, oh, maybe it's possible to go 100 kilowatt. I went all the way, I don't think, did I go all the way to the crew to try to find over 200 amp plugs? But by the end of the day, it's sneaky advertisement because it supports CCS 1, a CCS 2 version 1, up to 200 amp, 75 kilowatt or 72 kilowatt. But nowadays, the cars you see, they are CCS 2. I mean CCS version 2, and that goes to at least 500 amp or beyond. So it's a bit confusing maybe, but in US you then have CCS version 1. No, sorry, CCS Type 1 version 1, and then CCS Type 1 version 2. Yeah, just to make things, to make confusion complete. Yeah, but I just wonder why the heck US doesn't adapt to Type 2. Maybe they don't have any incentives, they don't have any motivation to move over to Type 2. Like, to me, though, it's like, why don't we standardize everything, right? Just like finally iPhone went over to USB-C. It was always a hassle every time my wife wanted to charge in the car, and I was like, I have all my devices run on USB-C, and then her iPhone still uses that proprietary iPhone plug. But yeah, interesting though. In the old days, some old cars they use CHAdeMO. So Soul, for example, Kia Soul uses CHAdeMO and Type 1. Leaf uses CHAdeMO, but that could be because they have influence from Japan, and Japan is kind of CHAdeMO. CHAdeMO was invented, it was a joint venture between Japan and France. So that's why you find some CHAdeMOs in the Japanese cars, but also some other, wait, the French cars? Yeah, the triplets. iMIEV and C0, those, they have kind of weird. They have a Type 1 AC charging on one side, and then CHAdeMO plug on the other side. Yeah, I wonder if you can double penetrate. No, you can't. That doesn't make any sense, right? But so yeah, back then, what the heck, man? This car bonks at you if you just changes the wiper settings. Seriously, man? Seriously? Holy shit. Okay, but in the old days, it seems like when the triplets were actually invented back then or designed, Type 2 was not that common, or the CCS, especially the CCS, was not out yet. It was the E-Up that was the first EV in Europe to have CCS plug, and then e-Golf came soon after, and this was in I think it was in 2016 or 15, 16 there, roughly there. But the Type 2 existed earlier because Tesla used Type 2 and it came out in 2013. So I wonder if Tesla was one of the first cars to come out with Type 2 along with, not sure, Smart maybe? Or, yeah. But it was interesting that back then when they designed Soul, for example, in lack of other, sorry for the bingo, but in lack of other available DC fast charging ports, they had to go for CHAdeMO. Because someone asked me, hey, when did Soul get the CCS? Well, it happened with a Soul EV. No, sorry. The e-Soul, yeah, the 64 kilowatt hour e-Soul that came in 2021, I think. So before that, the 30 and the 27 Soul, they had the CHAdeMO and the Type 2. And then Nissan, man, like Nissan, they just, for some reason, Nissan stuck with CHAdeMO for the longest time. They went, the classic Nissan, the 24 and the 30 Nissans, they had Type 1 and CHAdeMO because that's what was available back then, right? But then with the 40 Leaf, they still held on to the CHAdeMO, but they went to Type 2. So it was a weird combo with Type 2 and CHAdeMO. I think that's the only EV out there that has the Type 2 and CHAdeMO. But then eventually, even the late like 62 Leaf has CHAdeMO. It was until Aria came out that they finally went for CCS. So it's interesting because the CHAdeMO lost the battle CCS just gained popularity in Europe, and more cars they went for it. And eventually also the CCS version 2 became more popular, so you can go 500 amp, not only 200 amp. And then CHAdeMO was stuck at 125 amp only. So that was also the advantage, yeah. Because back then, like in when like Kona came out, right, in 2017, 18, CHAdeMO only had 125, whereas CCS, when it came out, it already supported 200 amp, so it was already superior. So CHAdeMO was more or less restricted to around 50 kilowatt, and mostly because also the charger that those plugs were attached to, they only had maximum 50 kilowatt on the power module. ABRP and FSX chargers, you guys know, right? And then later the tritium with the tee sound when you charge it. I think I need to put in no interval now, wiper. But also lots of, I could talk forever about this, but also interesting is that it's a bit confusing when you look at the different charging apps or whatever. You can see that the CHAdeMO plugs, they are listed as 62.5 kilowatt. And there's is that the faster CHAdeMO? Well, there is some places. If you guys saw recently when I did the 500 kilometer challenge with the Soul, that Soul, the newer Souls with the CHAdeMO, they actually support 173 amps or around 60 kilowatt, 65 kilowatt actually. And also the Leaf, the E Plus, the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf, that even goes up to 200 amp, but not for too long. But actually, also fun fact, in Japan, supposedly, they have faster CHAdeMO that goes beyond 200 amp, and then you can actually get 100 kilowatt on Leaf. Just wonder how fast it rapid gates when you pump in 100 kilowatt. You probably don't get it for too long. But okay, back to the whole, what was it again? CHAdeMO. Yeah, so the confusing part is that for some reason CPOs, they list CHAdeMO they end up with 62.5 kilowatt because they take 125 amp multiplied by 500 volt. and then they get 62.5 kilowatt. So they assume that you get, you have 500 volt car, but there is no, like on the market, there is no such thing. I don't even know if the chargers can go that high. I know, okay, chargers, they can support 400 volt and maybe up to 450, right? Like Kempower, or I'm not sure if 450 is a limit or not, but when you use the EGMP cars like a EV6 or a Ioniq 5, they use a converter to convert from and when you plug it in 400 volt chargers, it needs to convert. Normally you don't see much detail, but when you plug it in the Kempower, the old Kempower with 400 volt architecture, you can see the voltage, and the pack voltage might be at 650, 700 volts, but it requests 450 volt flat from the Kempower. And I wonder if it's because for compatibility, they figured out that most 400 volt chargers, they can go up to 450 volts. And that's why it will work, without any problems. So the Koreans, they were actually quite smart. They didn't go crazy and just try to pull 500 volt. Then they might end up like the Chinese, that suddenly they won't work on some chargers. But yeah, and then also another interesting fact is that I believe that Taycan does not, the EGMP platform uses the rear drivetrain. I think I got this confirmed when I talked to some Korean, Kia engineers. They use the rear drivetrain to do the conversion, and they have a variable voltage step up, whereas Taycan uses a fixed voltage doubler, which is probably simpler, but then they can make it, smaller. But it supports 150 kilowatt. But it's actually a extra device that they put in there. Because I believe that for Taycan, if you go for the lower, 79 kilowatt hour Taycan, the voltage, and it's not 800 volt architecture, it's like 650 something volt. So which means that when you arrive at low state of charge, for the voltage doubler, you request only around 320 volts or something. And then if you go to those old ABB FSX chargers, the 50 kilowatt chargers that are limited to 125 amp on the CCS plug, you get around 35 or 38 kilowatt. Yeah, it's something crazy like that. In the old days, pack voltage actually matters. I remember when I drove the ID4 with a 62 or the 58 kilowatt hour battery, it had nice over 400 volt, and then with 125 amp limit on the plug on the CCS2, no, that was CCS1 plug. That was the Phoenix plug, yeah, CCS1, but 125 amp. I would get close to 50 kilowatts, which was nice. And then the e-Golf would get only around 35, 36 volt at the bottom. Yeah. And then there were some cars I tested. I think it was a BMW recently, or not long ago, like just a couple of years ago. BMW iX, I think it was. iX1, sorry. BMW iX1 has so low pack voltage, around 300 volts something, that if you go to those old 50 kilowatt chargers, you get around 35 kilowatt only. Shit, man. But fortunately in Norway, they are getting kind of extinct. I almost forgot about that. I'm sorry guys when I did the whole explanation. In the old days, those 50 kilowatt FSX ABB, they were equipped with 125 amp Phoenix plug CCS1, and also 125 amp CHAdeMO. But for some reason, the CHAdeMO plugs, they usually gave only maximum 120 amps. I spent a lot of time using CHAdeMO when I used the CHAdeMO adapter on Tesla. And that's also another thing. Man, the whole history about the CHAdeMO adapter, man. Like Tesla, they managed to make this adapter that goes from, you can plug it into a CHAdeMO plug, which was very common around 10 years ago. Yeah, they were all over the place. Every 50 kilowatt charger back then had a CHAdeMO plug and a CCS. And then there were actually some, in the really old days, there were some CHAdeMO only fast chargers, like those old SIS control chargers that were used by Circle K or Statoil. Okay, Circle K in the old days, they were so highly unreliable. In Grønn Kontakt, they were running the charging network, and then Circle K took over, some shit like that. Don't remember. But then eventually CCS won, and then eventually they went over to the high power chargers. You know, one of the few first high power chargers in Norway was Nygårdskrysset near Ski. Was the 175 kilowatt ABB charger with a, you know, the high thing stacked that they still use them today, or actually they're getting kind of extinct now. Nowadays I feel like Kempower and Alpitronic, they are just quite dominant in Europe. And yeah, so back then at Nygårdskrysset it was high power charger, 175 kilowatt. I was like, oh, how can I get that speed? No, it was limited to 200 amp on the plug. And actually in the early days, when Ioniq was quite new, also those plugs were limited to I believe 200 amp. But then eventually they got the 500 amp liquid cooled cables, and you guys know the rest of the story. So I mean, it's interesting because nowadays you just, I mean, especially in Norway or many other countries, you don't know about all the whole history about what kind of plugs it has. Yeah, and how it can, you know, yeah. One last thing, by the way, is that Nyland Falcon, the Tesla Model S from 2013, it actually supports quite high current on single phase. When I went to Krattholm in Narvik, he has this roadster charger, and there was this adapter or something. I don't remember how it was. Yeah, there was an adapter from the roadster plug, a proprietary roadster plug, to Type 2 or something. I remember on Nyland Falcon I would see 230 volt single phase 72 amp. I don't remember, or 48 amp. It was like I was charging on 10 kilowatt on single phase. It was crazy, man. And I think Tesla might be the only car that can charge on that high single phase current. Most other cars, they will go up to 32 amp only, 7.4 kilowatts. So anyway, I need to end very, at least I find it very interesting podcast about different plugs and stuff, because I'm gonna pull out now and charge. Yeah. Oh shit, could okay, could be slippery. Well, no, it's actually not. But yeah, so anyway, I think that's gonna be for now. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thank you for watching. Oh shit, winter tires on 3-ton beast. And talk to you guys later.